I met James on the intensive care floor of St. Mary's Hospital. At the time, I was a nurse with 10 years of experience, assigned to care for James, who had been hospitalized with injuries from a car accident. My first impression was that he was an arrogant rich man, but as I continued providing daily care, I became drawn to his sincerity and kindness. "Margaret, I'm so glad to have met a woman like you," James said as he took my hand on the day of his discharge. At that time, I still didn't know he was the son of the distinguished Williams family in Boston. I had only heard that he worked in finance. 6 months after our first date, James proposed to me in Boston Park. As he offered me a simple but beautiful diamond ring, his eyes reflected both anxiety and hope. "My family is a bit complicated. But I love you. I believe we can overcome anything together." I understood the true meaning of those words the day I first met his family. James's mother, Eleanor, was a well-known philanthropist in Boston who served on the boards of multiple organizations. On the day I was invited to her mansion, my hands were trembling with nervousness. "Welcome, Margaret," Eleanor's voice was as cold as ice. Beside her stood Diana, James's sister. I had heard she was unmarried and lived with her mother. Their eyes appraised me, as if sizing me up. "Please sit down. Nursing must be such demanding work." Eleanor's words showed no genuine interest, she was merely looking for conversation starters. When I mentioned my small house with a garden, she said condescendingly, "Well, what a lovely little house. Jamie has always been such a sensitive boy since childhood. That's why he needs someone special," Diana said with obvious sarcasm. By emphasizing the nickname, Jamie, she seemed to be highlighting the long history between them and James that excluded me. From that day on, as the wedding preparations progressed, the harassment from Eleanor and Diana gradually escalated. "This venue isn't suitable for the Williams family standard. Doesn't that cake look a bit cheap? The font on the invitations should be more elegant." Each of their comments left small wounds on my heart. James noticed but prioritized respecting his mother. "Margaret, mother is old-fashioned. Couldn't you compromise a little?" I nodded silently to those words, but inside I was disappointed. However, the most painful moment was when Eleanor mentioned my background in front of her friends. "Margaret is such a hard worker. Her father worked in a factory, and her mother passed away early. Still, she managed to become a nurse. How admirable." After that party, I cried in the car. James hugged my shoulders apologetically, repeating, "They'll understand eventually." But I couldn't imagine that day would ever come. In the midst of this, I made a decision. I would wear my mother's heirloom wedding dress. My mother, Lillian Harrison, had passed away from cancer 5 years ago. She was a strong woman who raised me as a single mother until the very end. "I'm planning to wear Mom's dress," I told James. He looked a bit troubled. "Mother says she wants to buy you a new dress. It's such a generous offer. But this matters to me." Eventually, James respected my wishes. However, at that time, I had no idea that this decision would further anger Eleanor and Diana. 1 week before the wedding, Eleanor suddenly visited my home. Diana was with her, carrying a shopping bag from an expensive boutique. "Margaret, I found a lovely dress for you. I want you to wear this." She took out a cream-colored simple dress from the paper bag. It was indeed beautiful, but it wasn't what I wanted. "Eleanor, thank you. But I've already decided to wear my mother's dress." The smile disappeared from Eleanor's face. "But that's old, isn't it? If you're becoming a member of our new family, you should have a dress suitable for a new beginning. My mother's dress is special to me." "Oh, I see," Eleanor placed the shopping bag on the table. "I was just trying to understand the feelings of a daughter who lost her mother. How disappointing." After they left, I took out my mother's dress that I had carefully stored in the closet and looked at it with some anxiety. That simple yet elegant dress reminded me of my mother's beauty and strength. "Mom, I want to be strong like you," I whispered, looking forward to the wedding day. The morning before the wedding day began with soft early summer sunlight. The light streaming through the windows of my small house in the Boston suburbs gently illuminated the bedroom. The clock showed 7 o'clock, and I was already awake, staring at the ceiling with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation, thinking about tomorrow's wedding. "Margaret, are you up?" It was a call from my best friend, Sophia. She was serving as my maid of honor and helping with the wedding preparations. "Yes, I'm already up. Couldn't really sleep." "Of course. Tomorrow's the biggest day of your life. We need to go to the venue today for final checks. I'll pick you up." After hanging up, I went to the closet to check my mother's wedding dress again. The vintage dress with elegant lace sleeves and pearl beads gleamed just like in the photos of my mother when she was young and beautiful. "Mom, tomorrow you'll walk down the aisle with me too." I lightly kissed the dress and started preparing breakfast. At that moment, the doorbell rang. "Good morning, Margaret." When I opened the door, Eleanor and Diana were standing there. Both were perfectly made up and dressed in expensive brand clothing. "Eleanor, Diana. What brings you here so early?" "We came to help the bride before her big day tomorrow," Eleanor said with a fake smile. "Let us help with the final adjustments to your dress." I hesitated. I had a feeling their presence would disrupt my peaceful morning. However, wanting to build a harmonious relationship for James's sake, I reluctantly invited them in. "I'm sorry, but I need to go for a final check at the venue now. The dress is already adjusted." "Oh. But we came all this way," Diana's expression showed obvious dissatisfaction. "Besides, we want to check the venue too." "But Margaret, we just want to help," Eleanor's voice had something cold lurking in it. "We can wait here while you're at the venue. When you return, we can have tea." Unable to find a reason to refuse, I reluctantly agreed. When Sophia came to pick me up, I left the house with an uneasy feeling. "Are those two really okay to leave alone?" Sophia asked as she drove. "Honestly, I don't know. But we're going to be family, so I need to try to meet them halfway." Sophia bit her lip in dissatisfaction but said nothing more. The venue check took longer than expected. Final meetings with the florist, seating arrangements, changes to the catering menu, small problems kept emerging. Before I knew it, dusk had fallen outside. "I need to get back quickly," I looked at the clock, worried. Eleanor and Diana might still be at the house. On the way home, my heart was filled with an inexplicable anxiety. When Sophia's car stopped in front of the house, I immediately noticed something was wrong. Thin smoke was rising from the garden. "What's this?" I jumped out of the car and rushed to the garden. What I saw there took my breath away. The remains of a small bonfire in the corner of the garden. And in the ashes, white cloth scraps and pearl beads. Mom's dress. I knelt down and picked up the remaining pearls from the ashes with trembling hands. The dress was almost completely burned, barely recognizable. I raised my face at the sound of voices coming from the living room. "Margaret, you're back." Eleanor and Diana came out onto the terrace. Their expressions showed superficial concern. "Why did you do this?" My voice was trembling. "What are you talking about?" Eleanor feigned innocence. "Didn't I say old dresses are unlucky? Besides, the iron fell over accidentally." "I'm really sorry. If the iron fell over, why is the dress burning in the garden?" Sophia confronted them, unable to contain her anger. "We carried it outside in a panic," Diana answered. "It would have been terrible if the house had caught fire, right?" I was speechless. Their lie was obvious. They had deliberately burned my mother's dress. But their expressions were perfectly composed. I'm calling James. I took out my phone. Yes, do that, but he's probably busy now, Eleanor said calmly. Besides, even if he comes, the burned dress won't come back. When I called James, his response disappointed me. What? Mother deliberately burned the dress. That's impossible, Margaret. Mother may be old-fashioned, but she's not the type to do such mean things. But, James. Tomorrow is an important day. Please don't take on extra stress. I'm busy with final arrangements. I'll call you later. After hanging up, I was overwhelmed with despair. Eleanor and Diana looked down at me with triumphant expressions. For tomorrow, why don't you wear the dress we chose? Eleanor suggested in a sweet voice. Jamie would be pleased. After they left, I sat in front of the remains of my mother's dress with Sophia. What should I do? Margaret, we need to find another dress for tomorrow, Sophia hugged my shoulders. I'll call my friend's boutique. It might not be too late. In desperation, I stood up and took my mother's photo. There was a small pocket on the back of the photo, and an old USB drive fell out. It had a small label attached that said, "Keepsake." This. At that moment, a strange calmness spread through my heart. I decided to wear a black dress to the wedding tomorrow. And I decided to check what this USB drive my mother had left meant. Sophia, can you borrow a black evening dress? I'll wear that tomorrow. Black. But for a wedding. Yes, black. And let's check what's on this USB now. When I inserted the USB into the computer, there was a folder titled Open in Emergency Only. With trembling hands, I clicked on it, and surprising materials about the Williams family appeared, along with detailed instructions on how to install surveillance cameras in my house. Mother had prepared something to protect me until the end. On the morning of the wedding day, I woke up with quiet determination. The light coming through the window was bright, announcing the beginning of a perfect wedding day, but my heart was in turmoil like a storm. Margaret, are you ready? Sophia entered the bedroom with makeup tools. Her eyes showed concern. Yes, I nodded. Though I barely slept last night. On the bed lay the black dress Sophia had borrowed from a friend the night before. It was a simple yet elegant design with an open back and a floor-length mermaid line at the hem. It was more of a formal evening dress for a high-end restaurant or gala dinner than a wedding dress. Are you really going through with this? Sophia asked anxiously. Yes. There's no other choice. With those words, I remembered the contents of the USB drive I had found last night. It contained data from surveillance cameras my mother had secretly installed in our house, materials about the Williams family's fraudulent charitable activities, and a letter to me. Margaret, if my intuition is correct, the day may come when you'll need this information. Especially when your involvement with that family deepens. The letter, written 5 years ago, showed that my mother had been concerned about my future. She had worked briefly for the Williams family's charity organization and knew their true faces. When we were ready, I headed to the venue with Sophia. The old stone church was beautifully decorated with white flowers and bustling with about 200 guests. When we entered the waiting room, the bridesmaids greeted me with worried faces. Margaret, that dress. Interrupting their words, I quietly said, don't worry. Everything is according to plan. I found Tom, a venue staff member, at the back of the church and handed him the USB drive. Please, play the file named For Venue 15 minutes after the ceremony starts. He looked puzzled, but after hearing my situation, he agreed. Tom was a friend from college and knew how badly I had been treated by Eleanor and Diana. And then the fateful moment arrived. The church organ began playing the wedding march, and the large doors opened. I took a deep breath and stepped onto the central aisle of the church, dressed in black. A murmur spread through the venue. Voices of surprise and confusion echoed softly, and some guests covered their mouths with their hands, whispering to each other. At the end of the aisle stood James in a tuxedo, with a confused expression. And beside him, Eleanor and Diana wore smiles full of superiority. "Looks like morning clothes," Diana's whisper was loud enough to reach nearby guests. "How pitiful. She just wants attention," Eleanor chimed in. Ignoring their words, I continued walking down the aisle with dignity. When I reached James, he silently mouthed, "Why?" I just smiled without answering. The minister began the ceremony, and we stood facing each other. As the minister's words continued, I glanced at the clock. It was just a few minutes until the promised time. "We are gathered here to celebrate the marriage of Margaret Harrison and James Williams." As the minister's voice echoed, suddenly the screen mounted on the side wall of the church lit up. Murmurs again enveloped the venue, and the minister paused mid-sentence. The screen showed my living room. The date and time stamp indicated it was from yesterday. Eleanor and Diana appeared in the video, and there was a clear image of them handling my mother's wedding dress. "Now she'll have to wear the dress I chose," Eleanor's cruel voice echoed throughout the church. "Such an old-fashioned dress. Even morning clothes would be better," Diana said with a laugh. The two of them deliberately set fire to the dress with a lighter and carried it out to the garden to burn. Many guests gasped in shock as they watched the precious heirloom turn to ashes, accompanied by their laughter. The video continued, revealing various harassments that Eleanor and Diana had carried out over the past few months. Scenes of them hiding invitations, canceling cake orders by phone, and spreading false rumors about my friends. "Stop this right now." Eleanor stood up and shouted. "This is edited footage." Diana also hurriedly stood up and called out, "Someone turn off the screen." But the video continued. This time it showed footage from an earlier date, revealing evidence of Eleanor misappropriating funds from the Williams family's charitable foundation for personal purposes. It showed Eleanor creating fake receipts and giving instructions by phone to transfer part of the donation money to her own bank account. This was the material my mother had left for me. "This is a crime," Eleanor shouted, her face red, and began walking toward the exit. Diana followed her, trying to escape. In the silent church, I took the microphone. "Eleanor, Diana. My wedding isn't over yet." My voice was calm, but it contained the anger and determination I had been suppressing. The two stopped and turned back with fearful expressions. James stood stunned, but eventually took a deep breath and took my hand. His eyes reflected sadness, anger, and determination. "Margaret. I didn't know that my mother and sister were so." His voice was trembling. "I wanted you to know," I quietly answered. "This is how I've been treated by your family." "You didn't believe me." James was silent for a moment, then turned to face the guests. "Everyone, I apologize for today. But this is the truth. My mother and sister burned Margaret's precious heirloom and tried to ruin our wedding." He gripped both my hands tightly and continued with a serious gaze. "I cannot forgive my mother and sister's actions. Today marks the beginning of our new family. Margaret, I love you. Whether in a black dress or any other appearance, you are beautiful." Eleanor and Diana were now completely isolated. Unable to bear the cold gazes of the guests around them, they began walking toward the exit. However, the church doors opened from the outside, and two police officers entered. "Ms. Eleanor Williams, we'd like to speak with you about embezzlement charges." The materials my mother had left also included instructions on how to report to the police. I thanked my mother in my heart. "This is a misunderstanding," Eleanor shouted, grabbing a police officer's arm. Her perfect makeup began to crumble with sweat, far from her usual dignified appearance. Diana stood behind her mother, wiping tears with a handkerchief. The church fell silent, and 200 guests watched the situation with bated breath. In the heavy atmosphere flowing through the venue, I took the microphone. "Everyone, please don't let this ruin my wedding." My voice was surprisingly calm. Despite being exhausted from the events of the past 24 hours, I felt a strength welling up from deep inside. It felt as though my mother's strength was supporting me. "Officers, could you please detain them until the ceremony is over? They are family members after all." The police officers exchanged glances and nodded slightly. "We'd like to speak with you at the station once the ceremony concludes." The minister cleared his throat, trying to ease the tension. "Shall we continue with the ceremony?" James squeezed my hand firmly and smiled in a way that showed his deep gratitude. However, just as the ceremony was about to resume, Eleanor raised her voice again. "Wait. I have something to say." She began walking toward the altar with trembling legs. The police officers tried to stop her, but I raised my hand to halt them. When Eleanor stood before James and me, her eyes reflected emotions I had never seen before. Fear and anger, mixed with a hint of regret. "Jamie, I was only trying to protect you." Eleanor's voice was small and shaking. "I couldn't believe this woman was worthy of you. When I think about our family's traditions and honor." "That's enough, Mother." James's voice was cold. "The video said it all. You burned Margaret's precious heirloom out of pure malice. Not only that, but you've been hurting Margaret for a long time. I cannot defend such actions." The blood drained from Eleanor's face. She had placed her last hope in her son. "But I thought I was doing what was best for you." "No, Eleanor," I said quietly. "You did it for yourself. What you wanted to protect was your own status and superficial honor, not true family bonds." "Be quiet." Eleanor's anger exploded. "What do you know? I've devoted everything to protecting the Williams family honor for 30 years. Mother." James interrupted with a strong tone. "What you've been protecting is just appearances. You've embezzled foundation money, looked down on others, and eliminated anyone who didn't go along with your wishes. That's not family or honor." At this point, Diana stepped forward. Her eyes were red, and her makeup had smudged. "It's all Mother's fault," she suddenly cried out. "I just did what I was told. Mother was the one who said to burn the dress." Eleanor looked at her daughter with an expression of disbelief. "Diana. I'm sick of it." Diana continued, crying. "I've always done what Mother said. College, work, all paths Mother chose. I wanted to live my own life too." Guests held their breath as they watched the family fracture exposed in public. The confrontation between Eleanor and Diana was an outburst of genuine feelings that had been suppressed for years. In the midst of this chaos, James suddenly knelt before me. A murmur rose from the audience. "Margaret," his voice echoed throughout the church. "I don't expect you to forgive my mother and sister for burning your mother's dress. But I want to protect you for the rest of my life. I'm sorry for what happened today. But at the same time, I'm glad the truth has come to light." He took a velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a simple and beautiful wedding ring, separate from the engagement ring I was already wearing. "Let's create our own family from today. Margaret, I ask you again. Will you be my wife?" In that moment, the atmosphere in the church changed. From tension and conflict to a stillness filled with hope. Tears fell from my eyes. "Yes, James. Of course I will." I took his hand and helped him stand up. Then we embraced tightly. Applause erupted from the venue, and voices of blessing echoed. Eleanor and Diana had become out of place. The police officers approached them and quietly urged them to leave the church. The two of them looked back one last time and gazed at James and me. Eleanor's eyes showed a color of defeat I had never seen before. She said nothing, just nodded slightly. Diana grabbed her mother's arm, and they turned sideways and left the church. After they had gone, the minister began the ceremony again. This is truly a testament to love. I bless these two who have overcome difficulties and are bound by truth and sincerity. The ceremony, after its unexpected turn of events, became more meaningful. My best friend Sophia took the microphone and began her speech. Margaret, black is the color of new beginnings. It's a testament to having overcome everything. Today, you became not just a bride, but a symbol of strength and dignity. At her words, I smiled from the heart. Approaching the wedding in a black dress was certainly not an ideal choice. However, it had become a symbol of the bond between my mother and me, and of the courage to face the truth. By the time we exchanged vows and rings, the atmosphere in the church had completely changed. The initial tension and confusion had disappeared, and everyone present had become witnesses to true love and courage. By the time the ceremony ended and we left the church, the outside was enveloped in a beautiful twilight. Guests threw rice and flower petals to bless us, surrounded by the warm smiles of family and friends. In the car heading to the reception venue, James took my hand and quietly said, "Margaret, you're truly wonderful. Today, I feel like I've fallen in love with your strength and kindness all over again." "You were wonderful too," I returned his gaze. "Thank you for finally taking my side." "It was too late," he said apologetically. "I should have realized sooner. But I promise. From now on, we'll walk through our new life together, hand in hand." Looking at the setting sun outside the window, I spoke to my mother in my heart. "Mom, you protected me until the very end. Thank you." When we arrived at the reception venue, we were introduced again as bride and groom. I, in my black dress, was no longer an unusual presence but stood proudly as the star of the day. As we danced, laughed, and received blessings, James and I were taking our first steps as a family in the true sense. It had been a long and difficult journey, but perhaps it was a trial to strengthen our bond. I touched the shoulder strap of my black dress lightly and smiled. A month later, James and I held another small wedding ceremony. In a lush garden in the Boston suburbs, surrounded by about 50 close friends and colleagues. This time, it was a wedding in the form I truly wished for. What I wore was not my mother's dress, but a pure white simple dress adorned with my mother's heirloom pearl brooch at the neckline. The design was modern yet somehow retained echoes of my mother's dress. It was created by Sophia in collaboration with a local designer. "Margaret, you're truly beautiful." Tears welled up in James's eyes. For the past month, he had been rushing around for our new life while dealing with the issues of his mother and sister. Since that day, the relationship with Eleanor had been completely severed. She had been charged with embezzlement from the charitable foundation and was currently out on bail, but her position in society had completely collapsed. The local newspaper reported her case with the headline, "Fraudster Behind the Mask of Charity," revealing the reality of years of false charitable activities. Surprisingly, Diana chose to distance herself from her mother and testify as a witness for the prosecution. Released from her mother's control, she seemed to have begun walking her own life's path for the first time. Last week, an apology letter arrived from her. "I'm truly sorry. I followed my mother's orders and hurt you. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I hope someday you might listen to what I have to say. I wasn't ready to meet her yet, but I thought that day might come someday." Meanwhile, James was proceeding with the legal process to reclaim control of the assets left by his father. Those assets, which Eleanor had been mismanaging improperly for years, were rightfully James's inheritance. He used part of it to purchase our new home. A small but warm house in the Boston suburbs. The place for the beginning of our new life. Cheers to Margaret and James's happy future. Led by Sophia, all the wedding attendees raised their glasses. There were colleagues from the hospital, my old friends, and James's few relatives and friends. Surrounded by their smiles, I felt for the first time the warmth of a family in the true sense. During the ceremony, James suddenly took the microphone and declared before the attendees, "From today, I will dissolve the foundation established by my mother and create a new Lillian Memorial Fund. This fund will support single mothers and their children." When I heard those words, tears flowed from my eyes. My mother's name would become a symbol of new charitable activities, spreading goodwill in the true sense. There could be no greater gift. A year after the wedding, a new life was added to our family. The little girl was named Lillian, the same as my mother. Holding her small hand, I spoke to my mother's photo. "Mom, just as you protected me until the end, now it's my turn to protect this child." With our daughter in a baby carrier, James and I planted a young apple tree in the garden of our new home. It symbolized the growth of our family, and at the same time, it was a symbol of strength passed down from my mother to me, and then to my daughter. Remembering my mother who loved apple pie, I smiled slightly. The story that began on the day I walked down the aisle in a black dress continues into a new life built on overcoming hardships and on stronger bonds and truth. That was the last and greatest gift my mother left for me.